The Yamnaya culture. But before we get too deep into the video, first I want to tell you guys about my social media platforms. So I have a Clubhouse account and we can actually talk to one another on it. I also host Clubhouse rooms every now and then where I might talk about history and genetics of the Middle East and Africa. I have a Twitter page, a Facebook account, and a Facebook page, as well as a Instagram, all titled The Hebrew of Israel. And what I typically do on these platforms is post upcoming videos as well as slides for my presentations. And so just be on the lookout for all of that on my social media platforms. And if you want to support me financially for the channel, you can look at my Patreon as well as my PayPal and my GoFundMe. And with all of that out of the way, let's begin with the video. So, what is the Yamnaya culture? We know, genetically speaking, the Yamnaya have Caucasus hunter-gatherer and Eastern European hunter-gatherer ancestry. This is from Upper Paleolithic genomes, revealed deep roots of modern Eurasians, and it says, we find that Caucasus hunter-gatherer, or a population close to them, contributed to the genetic makeup of individuals from the Yamnaya culture, which have been impacted as vectors for the profound influx of Pontic steppe ancestry that spread westwards into Europe and east into Central Asia with metallurgy, horse riding, and probably Indo-European languages in the 3rd millennium BC. Caucasus hunter-gatherer ancestry in these groups is supported by admixture analysis, the admixture statistics, which best describe the Yamnaya as a mix of Caucasus hunter-gatherer and Eastern European hunter-gatherers. So here's just a visualization of that from a chart. Yamnaya are 50-50, having Eastern hunter-gatherer, as you can see in blue, and having Caucasus hunter-gatherer, as you can see in green. And the Yamnaya are Proto-Indo-Europeans. So now let's actually learn about the Yamnaya culture. So this is from Science Magazine. Mysterious Indo-European homeland may have been in the steppes of Ukraine and Russia. What do you call a male sibling? If you speak English, he is your brother. Greek, call him a frater. Sanskrit, Latin, Old Irish, prater, frater, or brethren, respectively. Ever since the mid-17th century, scholars have noted such similarities among the so-called Indo-European languages, which span across the world and number more than 400 if dialects are included. Researchers agree that they can probably all be traced back to one ancestral language called Proto-Indo-European, or PIE. But for nearly 20 years, researchers have debated vehemently when and where Proto-Indo-European arose. Proto-Indo-European was first spoken by pastoral herders who lived in the vast steppelands north of the Black Sea beginning about 6,000 years ago. One study points out that these steepeland herders have left their genetic mark on most Europeans living today. Fans of the steppe hypothesis are now hailing a genetic study that used ancient DNA from 69 Europeans who lived between 8,000 and 3,000 years ago to genetically track ancient population movements. Among the team's samples were 9 ancient individuals, 6 males, 2 females, and a child of undetermined sex. From the Yamnaya culture north of the Black Sea in today's Russia, beginning about 6,000 years ago, these steppe people herded cattle and other animals, buried their dead in earthen mounds called kurgans, and may have created some of the first wheeled vehicles. Many linguists think Proto-Indo-European already had a word for wheel. The team also retrieved ancient DNA from four bones from the later corded wire culture in Central Europe. The comparison of the two cultures' DNA showed that the four corded wire people could trace an astonishing three-quarters of their ancestry to the Yamnaya. That suggested a mass migration of Yamnaya people from the steppe homeland into Central Europe about 4,500 years ago, one that could have spread an early form of Indo-European languages, the team concludes. And so here's just a visualization of the migration of Indo-Europeans on the bottom, and on the top, the Yamnaya culture from a genetic perspective. And so both overlap each other. And here's another study from Science magazine called Thousands of Horsemen May Have Swept into Bronze Age Europe, Transforming the Local Population. So it reads, call it an ancient thousand men march. Early Bronze Age men from the vast grasslands of the Eurasian steppe swept into Europe on horseback about 5,000 years ago and may have left most women behind. These mostly male migrants may have persisted for several generations, sending men into the arms of European women who interbred with them and leaving a lasting genetic impact on the genomes of living Europeans. It looks like males migrating in war with horses and wagons, says lead author and population geneticist Matthijs Jacobsen of Uppsala University in Switzerland or in Sweden. Europeans are descendants of at least three major migrations of prehistoric people. Finally, 5,000 to 48,000 years ago, nomadic herders known as the Yamnaya swept into Europe. They were an early Bronze Age culture that came from the grasslands and the grasslands or steppes of modern Russia and the Ukraine, bringing with them metallurgy and animal herding skills and possibly Proto-Indo-European, the mysterious ancestral tongue from which all of today's 40 Indo-European languages sprang. They immediately interbred with local Europeans who were descendants of both the farmers and hunter-gatherers. Within a few hundred years, the Yamnaya contributed to at least half of Central Europeans' genetic ancestry. Using a statistical method developed by graduate student Amy Goldberg in the lab of population geneticist Noah Rosenberg at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California, the team calculated that there were perhaps 10 men for every woman in the migration of the Yamnaya men to Europe, with a range of 5 to 14 migrating men for every woman. Such a skewed scenario or ratio arises red flags for some researchers who warn it is notoriously difficult to estimate the ratio of men to women accurately in ancient populations. But if confirmed, one explanation is that the Yamnaya men were warriors who swept into Europe on horses and drove horse-drawn wagons. Horses had been recently domesticated in the steppe, and the wheel was a recent invention. They may have been more focused on warfare with faster dispersals because of the technological inventions, says population geneticist Remus Nelson of the University of California, Berkeley, who is not part of the study. But warfare isn't the only explanation. The Yamnaya people could have been more attractive mates mates than European farmers because they had horses and new technologies such as copper hammers that gave them an advantage, Goldberg says. The findings that Yamnaya men migrated for many generations also suggest that all was not right back home in the steppe. It would imply a continuing strong it would imply a continuing strongly negative push factor within these steppes, such as chronic epidemics or diseases, says archaeologist David Anthony of Hitchwick College in One Unte, New York, who was not an author of the new study. Or he says it could be the beginning of cultures that sent out bands of men to establish new political aligned colonies in distant lands, as in later groups of Romans or Vikings. So here's just a map showing you again the expansion of the Yamnaya people from a genetic perspective. And also here's an overlay of the Indo-European languages. And again, it just matches perfectly. And so here is the paper. Massive migration from the steppe was a source for Indo-European languages in Europe. And it says we generated genome-wide data from 69 Europeans who lived between 8,000 through 3,000 years ago by enriching ancient DNA laboratories for a targeted set of almost 400,000 polymorphisms. By 6,000 through 5,000 years ago, farmers throughout much of Europe had more hunter-gatherer ancestry than their predecessors. But in Russia, the Yamnaya steppe herders of this time were descended not only from the preceding Eastern European hunter-gatherers, but also from a population of Near Eastern ancestry. Western and Eastern Europe came into contact 4,500 years ago in the late Neolithic corded wire people from Germany traced 75% of their ancestry to the Yamnaya, documenting a massive migration into the heartland of Europe from its eastern periphery. This steppe ancestry persisted in all sampled Central Europeans until at least 3,000 years ago and is ubiquitous in present-day Europeans. This result provided support for a steep origin of at least some of the Indo-European languages of Europe. However, our study shows that a later major overturn did occur, and that steppe migrants replaced 75% of the ancestry of Central Europeans. An alternative theory is the steppe hypothesis, which proposes that early Indo-European speakers were pastoralists of the grasslands north of the Black and Caspian Seas, and that their languages spread into Europe after the invention of wheeled vehicles. Our results make a compelling case for the steppe as a source of at least some of the Indo-European languages in Europe by documenting a mass migration 4,500 years ago associated with the Yamnaya and corded wire cultures, which are identified by prominence of the steppe hypothesis as vectors for the spread of Indo-European languages into Europe. So I'm just going to show you sort of like that migration of these peoples from the grasslands of modern-day Ukraine, Russia. And so basically, as I said, in the northern part of the Caucasus, they're going to spread. And there's the Yamnaya, there's the northern dialect and the southern dialect. And then you see them going west into Europe, going east into Central Asia, as they said, and some going south into the southern Caucasus and Anatolia. And then they spread even further, going into the Middle East, going into India, and going further west into Europe. And so just to show you that in a quick fashion, it's this, like that. So the Yamnaya culture, just covering everything that we learned, the Yamnaya culture are the ancestors of Proto-Indo-Europeans. Therefore, They are the ones to spread the Indo-European language. Also, the Yamnaya culture were also light-skinned, deriving their mutation from Caucasus hunter-gatherers, and the Yamnaya culture, Proto-Indo-Europeans, would have spread this light skin across Eurasia. And so this is from Ancient DNA, reveals how Europeans developed light skin and lactose intolerance, or lactose tolerance. And it says, the Bronze Age, around 3000 through 1000 BC, was a time of major advances. And whenever one culture developed a particular advantageous set of technologies, they became able to support a larger population and to dominate their neighbors. The study found that the geographical distributions of genetic variation at the beginning of the Bronze Age looked very different to today's, but by the end, it looked pretty similar, suggesting a level of migration and replacement of peoples not seen in Western Eurasia since. One people that was particularly important in the spread of both early Bronze Age technologies and genetics were the Yamnaya. With a package of technologies including the horse and the wheel, they exploded out of the Russian and Ukrainian steppe into Europe, where they met the local Neolithic farmers. By comparing DNA from various Bronze Age European cultures to that of both the Yamnaya and the Neolithic farmers, researchers found that most had a mixture of the two backgrounds. However, the proportions varied, with the Corded-Wire people of Northern Europe having the highest proportion of Yamnaya ancestry. Interestingly, the cultures with the most individuals with this mutation were the Yamnaya and their descendants. These results suggest that the mutation may have originated on the steppe and entered Europe with the Yamnaya, a combination of natural selection working on this advantageous trait and the advantageous Yamnaya culture passed down alongside it could then have helped it spread. Although this process still had far to go during the Bronze Age. This significant study has left us with a much more detailed picture of the Bronze Age Europeans. They had the light skin and range of eye colors we know today. And so here are, what the Proto-Indo-Europeans or the Yamnaya people would have looked like when they spread into Europe. These are Kurgan caves, reconstructions of those bodies. So here is again where light skin would have originated from. One of the branches, one of the alleles, SLC24A5 in the Caucasus hunter-gatherer, which would have been passed into the Yamnaya, since the Yamnaya are a mixture of Eastern hunter-gatherers and Caucasus hunter-gatherers. They would have been light skinned as well, and they were passed into Europe. And here's just the migration of the Yamnaya and the Indo-European languages, and of course a globe map of indigenous skin tones, most light-skinned peoples being in Eurasia. So, what do we know about the Yamnaya culture? We know, genetically speaking, the Yamnaya have Caucasus hunter-gatherer and Eastern European hunter-gatherer ancestry. The Yamnaya culture are the ancestors of Proto-Indo-Europeans. Therefore, Caucasus hunter-gatherer contributed to the genetic ancestry of Proto-Indo-Europeans. That's very important. The Yamnaya culture also had light skin, deriving this mutation from the Caucasus hunter-gatherers. Therefore, Caucasus hunter-gatherers contributed to the phenotype of Proto-Indo-Europeans. And that's sort of where we'll end off with the Yamnaya culture, everything that you need to know about them. One of the main things that I want for you to take away from this is the importance and the influence of Caucasus hunter-gatherers in the ancestry of Indo-Europeans. It's very important to know that Caucasus hunter-gatherers contributed to the ancestry of Indo-European people. But that's where we'll end with the Yamnaya culture. With that being said, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and click the bell. Leave a comment for any questions you might have. And again, follow my socials that I mentioned at the beginning of the video if you want to contact me. And with all of that out of the way, have a great day and shalom.